think today should be a really great opportunity for us to learn more, not only from CRS, but from each other, about the work that we've been doing here at Villanova for many years, mainly the kind of overseas work with our students and advisors. The topic today is taking overseas poverty-related immersion experiences to the next level, a conversation with Catholic Relief Services. We are in this partnership for the last 8 years. Villanova has been very committed to this partnership. The faculty have been very involved, along with members of campus ministry, the whole Office of Mission and Ministry. Villanova, as an institution today, begins, last night actually began a kind of a 4-day event called the celebration of our founder, St. Thomas of Villanova, who was also called Father of the Poor. He was extremely committed to working with the poor, and we have taken that legacy, we've retrieved it actually after many years, and made that the forefront of what we've done for many years in terms of our outreach as a Catholic Augustinian institution. And that outreach takes us to the streets of Philadelphia, it takes us to Latin America, it has taken us in the past to Africa, and also to Asia. What it is about, really, in many ways, will be the topic of what you'll be working on today. And that is, how are these experiences a commitment in justice, not just charity, not to diminish the significance and importance of charity, but how do we conceive our role in the world by way of a commitment, a faith commitment in justice? We try to bring about that kind of conversion in our students through reflection, and for them, in many ways, for our students, you're doing more than just an immersion experience. You're giving them also a message for life, I think, with regard to who they are in the world. And I think that place that they are in the world is one that they constantly need, as we all do. We're not any different. We need the discipline of reflection to think about who we are, where we are, what our commitments are, what our responsibilities are. We often like to think, as many in our country do, about rights, and they're highly individualized. The Catholic Church for centuries were very opposed to the language of rights precisely for that reason. It's only more recently in our history that we've retrieved that notion of right, but not without the concomitant responsibility of looking at our duty in the world. So that they're two sides of the same coin, not the highly individualized, but it should come out of a context of solidarity and commitment to a larger community, the world community, in which our brothers and sisters share on this planet. So that's the kind of consciousness we want to bring about. That's a long trajectory for many of our students. It takes sometimes years. Sometimes they don't get it while they're here, but you're planting seeds all the time. And the seeds will come to fruition, but we need to be extremely careful that we give them the kind of intellectual and moral tools with which to begin to do that work. That's what all of you will be involved in, is to take this to another level. How do we deepen that kind of a commitment to justice and to bring about that kind of transformation of their minds? And if they begin to think differently about themselves and their place in the world, then the transformation of their hearts will follow. Being a philosopher, I've always felt love is never blind. There must be knowledge. And so knowledge must inform the heart. So how we go about combining our commitment and justice involves, I think, those two categories. So I think this is going to be a wonderful day as you embark. This workshop, I think, is one that I would like to compliment all of you for being here, members of the faculty, our interns, members of campus ministry, mission and ministry. And I particularly want to thank Sue Toten, who works tirelessly, and I say this every year, but it's every year I'm even more indebted to the kind of work that she does in her office to bring you all into this dialogue. This would not take place without her effort and energy. So we're very, very grateful, Sue, for all you do. And I know I say that every year, but I hope you know that I mean every word, every year, and it grows in my appreciation of the work you do. CRS is our partner, has been our partner, and we have grown tremendously from that relationship, and we also hope that CRS has grown from the partnership with us, because we have been involved in this work for many years before the 8-year partnership. So this is a kind of mutuality where we learn from each other and the ways in which that process of learning can bring us all to another space and place. I'd like to then just introduce our CRS partners today. Kim Marie Lamberty is CRS Program Manager for, do they know who you're about?
Good morning.
Kim Marie Lamberty. She has a Doctor of Ministry degree, and she is responsible for developing and maintaining partnerships between CRS and parishes, dioceses, religious congregations, and Catholic organizations with mission programs in Haiti. Lamberty has been developing and managing faith-based justice, peace, cross-cultural, and community service programs for nearly 20 years. She is the founder and president of Just Haiti, a coffee development program for Haitian subsistence growers. She founded and was executive director of the Episcopal Service Corps, a national young adult service program for the Episcopal Church. And she served with Christian peacemaker teams in Palestine, Colombia, and on the U.S.-Mexican border accompanying civilian communities at risk of violence. She gives workshops across the country on developing sustainable, effective solidarity partnerships, and has written on Christian mission in zones of conflict, peace building in Colombia, and the spirituality of accompaniment. I like that, spirituality of accompaniment. Lamberty holds a Doctor of Ministry in Cross-Cultural Ministry from Catholic Theological Union and a master's degree in International Affairs from Columbia University. Delighted you're here. Thank you. Paul Miller is a native of Montclair, New Jersey, and is Senior Foreign Aid Advisor at CRS headquarters in Baltimore, not too far. His current position draws on more than 20 years of experience in relief, development, and human rights, with overseas assignments in Africa and Latin America. Early in his career, he worked at the United Nations Secretariat in New York, the USAID mission in Haiti, and has served in a variety of positions with CRS at home and abroad, including country representative in Senegal and Brazil. Most recently, as Africa team leader, Paul supervised programs and advocacy on issues related to conflict, humanitarian aid, and extractive industries, among others. During a recent 3-year hiatus from the agency, he managed projects on disability rights and taught courses on the politics of humanitarian aid at the Nitsa School. This is Admiral Nitsa? Is that Paul Nitsa?
Paul Nitsa?
Yeah. School of Advanced International Studies of the Johns Hopkins University, where he continues to serve as occasional adjunct faculty member. P.J. Craig. She is the replacement for Arlene Flaherty, so she has big shoes to fill. Welcome you.
Not replacement, not replacement.
No. She is, in her own right, a professional. She is the relationship manager and university liaison for CRS Northeast Mid-Atlantic region. And she will be ordained as a Presbyterian minister on Sunday. So congratulations. And as you can see, our CRS partners have been involved in interfaith work and are representatives of very strong religious traditions, all of which are very important in the work that we are about in the world, that we're all in this together. And if we can bring people of faith together to be about the work of justice and solidarity, hopefully we will make a significant difference in the world. So with that, I wish you well today. I'd like you to just take a moment of quiet prayer and think about and ask God what it is that you think you might want or need to take from this day, and ask God's grace and blessing in that endeavor. Amen. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation this morning. I want to make just a slight correction to my bio. I didn't look at it that closely before you guys got it. But the Episcopal Church founded the Episcopal Service Corps. I didn't. I was their first executive director prior to coming to CRS, but not the founder, just to be clear. So I'm just going to move into the beginning of our conversation this morning. My part of it will be to kind of give an overall vision of what we mean when we talk about partnership, solidarity, and accompaniment in our global programming, in particular for immersion programs. So to give a vision and some kind of basic principles that we want to use to think about how we do it in a way that really builds justice and mutuality, as Barbara said in the introduction. And Paul's going to go deeper into kind of how CRS has grappled with this in our programming and how that can be applicable to what you do here. And what I want to do is invite you, especially during my part, to interrupt me with your comments and questions as I go along. Please raise your hand if you have something you want to say. Let's have this be a dialogue so that it's not just me talking to you, but you're also offering your wisdom to the room. And I'll also stop and ask for comments as well, but please interrupt me, okay? So a little bit of church language here, since we are a Catholic institution. Why do we practice global solidarity? And it's because global solidarity gets at the very identity and heart of what it means to be Christian and Catholic. We are missionary or in mission by our very nature, as Christians and as Catholics. That is what we believe. And what does it mean to be in mission? It means we are in solidarity, right, with the efforts of all for what is noble and good. So what do we mean by solidarity? What does solidarity mean? Who wants to answer that? Anyone? We hear the word a lot. What does it mean?
Walking with.
Walking with. Excellent. Anything else? Anything else? So what it really means is to stand together. We stand together. We are united, right? As one human family, we are together, we belong together, right? And together we stand with the efforts of all for what is noble and good. That's what we mean by solidarity. And where does it come from in our faith tradition? Where it comes from, and I'm going to answer that question for you. Where it comes from in our faith tradition is how we understand God, right? And it comes from the first chapter of Genesis. God poured out God's self, right, in love to create humanity and all the rest of creation. We understand the identity of God as outpouring of self. And we are created in the image and likeness of God. So we also, our identity is outpouring of self. Does that make sense? Right? So that's where our understanding of mission and solidarity comes from. It's also where our understanding of our responsibility to each other comes from. In other words, each of us is created in the image and likeness of God. Each person, whether here in Philadelphia or in East Africa or Haiti or anywhere else in the world, each of us is created in God's image. And because of that, we are part of one human family. We stand together as one family. When one member of that family suffers, we all suffer. When one of us experiences joy, we all experience joy. Comments about that? Yes?
I'll ask this just because I thought about it.
Please do.
So
So for solidarity, what always strikes me as somewhat odd is that Christian groups walk into situations with that mentality of solidarity. But solidarity, I think, necessitates an invitation to that. And I don't always sense that people have actually invited us, that we just go ahead and stick our flag in the ground and say, we're in solidarity, darn it. And, it's a really troubling image to me, because there has to be invitation for us to walk or to journey or to stand with people. And I don't know that we really ever get around to being invited. We just kind of
Show
walk
up.
in. Yeah.
Right, and I think that gets to the very heart of what we're talking about today, right?
Oh, great. Thank you.
That does gets at the very heart of, I think, what we're all asking ourselves in a way, right? Like, is this my agenda, right? Is it all about me and my agenda and the transformation of the Villanova students and Villanova community, or is there some sense of mutuality to this where we are transforming each other? And there's a mutual invitation for that transformation. It's not just us coming and saying, well, we have a right to do whatever we want in your town. We're planting our flag and here we are. So I think you're at the heart of what we're going to talk about.
Well, and
Yes.
just to nuance it again, I think part of it is, as well, is that solidarity in the way that we're talking about it is always us going there, and it's never others coming to us.
Mhm.
So it's a very one-way relationship, the way it's structured,
Mhm.
how I've understood it.
Right, and the question is, how can we push the reset button so that it's not a one-way relationship? And that's kind of the next slide, right? Accompaniment is mutual. Right, so the work that we're doing is our opportunity to live, I'm repeating what I've already said, right? Our opportunity to live out our Catholic identity through accompanying our brothers and sisters overseas or here in relationship and service, but that accompaniment is mutual. And mutuality implies an invitation, right? And it also implies a relationship. And if we don't have an invitation or a relationship, right, then we actually aren't living out the true meaning of solidarity. And I think that's the point that you're making, and it's also what Paul and I are really trying to talk about this morning. And what we hope to get at by the end of the morning is some concrete action steps that you can take to work toward that in your different programs. Yes?
Can I just problematize that a little bit? Is that one of the reasons it's so different is there's just a reality of different levels of resource. I mean, we come into these relationships with an imbalance of resource and access to power and access to all sorts of things. And so we might say that we're in accompaniment with you, but that doesn't mean necessarily that that's true or that that's the way that other people see it. And the invitation might be something very different from what we might think.
Right.
I mean, and so we assume sometimes that, oh, if they want us to stand with them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's always a problem to overcome, that perception of that imbalance in resource is always there.
Right, and how is it possible to be in a mutual accompaniment relationship given the power imbalance? And the answer to that question is relationship is everything. It has to do with the quality of your relationship. You know, one of the groups that I have worked with, they said they talked to one of the communities that they have immersion trips in and asked them what's the best thing about these outside groups coming, and the community said when they leave. You know, and that is the reality of how some communities feel, because it is an outside intervention into their reality. And if it's not mutual, what are these communities getting out of it? I take immersion trips to Haiti all the time, actually. Sometimes on behalf of CRS and sometimes on behalf of the other project that was named in my bio. And my perspective on those immersion trips is that coffee growers in Haiti have better things to do than entertain my groups. They have better things to do. So what are they getting out of it? And that's the first question that we ask when we have the conversation about bringing a group. What are they getting out of it? And they have to understand and make sure that they're getting something out of it before they drop everything for a week and entertain my groups. So those are exactly the kinds of questions we need to be asking. So CRS in its overseas work has come up with a set of principles for how we do partnership well because what we're talking about is partnership, mutuality, partnership, not a relationship that has some kind of huge difference between giver and receiver, where our identity is giver and their identity is you're coming into my town to do something, right? So a partnership implies mutuality. And here's the set of principles. There's no time for me to go through every single one of these this morning, so I'm not going to, but there is a handout that you will receive that has each one of them with an explanation. And what I want to do this morning is to pull out the main themes from these principles, or 3 main themes from these principles that I want us to think about today. So you don't have to write them down because you're going to get a handout, okay? You can if you want, write them down, but you are going to get a handout. So the most important thing, and we've said this already, emphasize relationship, right? The relationship is the most important thing, right? God created us out of love. We are made for love. Love is what we care about, and love implies relationship. It's what we hope for fundamentally when we go, right? It's also what the receiving communities care about if you ask them. That's what they care about. They care that you want to be in relationship with them. Nobody wants to be your project, right? That is not their identity. The poor are not identified. Their identity is not their poverty. Right? Their identity is their dignity as created in God's image, just like me and just like everyone else. People don't want to be your project. They do want to be your friend. So the relationship is the most important thing. And whatever it is we do in our work, the primary aim is to foster relationship. That's what people care about. It's also what your students care about. And it's fundamentally what is transformational. On both sides. Transformational in me, transformational in the community that you're working in. So the projects that we do, often relationships end up leading to projects, you know? That is the nature of the thing, right? In the U.S. as well, in all of our relationships, sometimes we end up in projects, right? Often out of the relationship, we will have a project, right? But the point is, the project develops out of the relationship. It can also be a vehicle for developing relationships. And an example of that is I took a group to Haiti once, and the Haitian community said, come and help us paint our school. We didn't say we're going to come and paint your school for you. That is not what we did. They said, come and help us paint our school. So all the students in the whole school were painting their school, and we came and painted with them. That was a project, but no one will ever forget that. Not because of the school painting, but because we all sang songs together and shared some meals, and we taught each other songs in our own languages, and we developed relationships that have endured as a result of that. So that's what I mean. So our projects they develop out of relationships. They can also be relational in and of themselves. Does that make sense? I'm going to go kind of quickly now because we're going to run out of time. The other thing is, this is another, I'm pulling out a key theme, and subsidiarity is a word in Catholic social teaching, but what I'm talking about here is we are each created in God's image with equal dignity, right? In the cultural context of the United States, we tend to have a fix-it mentality. We're going to come into your community, whatever it is, we see poverty, we're going to fix something, whatever it is, right? And my question to you is, does that lift up the dignity of the community that we're trying to fix? What does it do? It kind of does, doesn't it? Diminish the dignity, right? So the point being, what we want to do is support and lift up local leadership, right, to lead their own project, whatever the project is that we are coming to out of our relationship. We want it to be locally led, right? And if it's not locally led, why is it not locally led? And how can we work with the community so that it is? so that it's not something that we're in charge of, but rather it's something that the community is in charge of. And I would tell you, in my immersion trips to Haiti, the coffee growers plan the trip. They plan the entire thing, I let go of it. And they are incredibly powerful experiences for the participants. The other is sustainability. The other theme I want to pull out, the theme of sustainability. So, sustainability, what does it mean? Anyone?
It can maintain itself.
It can maintain itself. So what happens after we're gone? Right? Is the thing, whatever the thing is that we're doing, whether it's a medical mission or whether it's a water project, which is the picture I have here, or whether it's something else, will it survive after we stop coming? Because we will not be there in perpetuity. It's not going to happen. Right? At some point, right, the thing has to go on without us. So what is it that we are doing to lay the groundwork and develop the local, what we would say, capacity for it to continue after we leave? And that's the question of sustainability, and it's a question we should be asking about all of our interventions. So, and this one gets to your question, and this is based on some of my own work. So I did some interviews with community leaders who were on the receiving end, right, of accompaniment and immersion trips and outside projects coming in, and I asked them, what is it that you're looking for? Why do you invite outsiders to come into your community? What are you looking for? And these were the answers I got. They're looking for relationship. That was the one thing that every single person I asked said. The thing is, relationship in and of itself is empowering all by itself. And sometimes that's all it takes, right? It is empowering that someone comes in from the outside who doesn't know you and but wants to listen to your story, and by being there validates your dignity and your life project and your hopes and dreams. That's what people care about. In addition to this, they say, we need investment. Nobody has ever said, come and give us stuff. No one has ever said that. No one has ever said, send food, send clothes. They say that when there's an emergency, but I mean in terms of a long-term way of addressing their hopes and dreams. People say what we really are looking for is investment in our community projects, in our hopes and dreams, so that we can develop our own community the way we want to develop it. We're looking for investment, right? And there is a sense of mutuality in that. And they say also, we know we don't have the best education. We know that we're lacking in certain skills. We know that you have those skills. You can help us with skills, right? With strengthening our ability to enact these kinds of projects. So skills, workshops, formation programs. Never underestimate the power of a workshop. It is incredibly empowering. I did a workshop once with a group of Haitians again, and it was on financial management. And at the end of the workshop, and organizational development. And at the end of the workshop, people stood up and they said, we are illiterate farmers. We have no education. But with a workshop like this, we understand now how things are supposed to work, which we didn't understand before. And now that we understand how things are supposed to work, no one can just come in from the outside and do whatever they want with us, right? Because we understand how it's supposed to work. Comments? Yes?
My experience is they do workshops for us, because
Even
I
better.
feel like we don't really know what to tell them to do. They know better what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Right, a workshop wouldn't be to us telling them what to do, really. A workshop would be, they identify a skill, right, that is lacking for them to achieve whatever their hopes and dreams might be, and they don't have that skill, and they identify that skill, and they say, can you help us to
Okay.
facilitate a workshop?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Other comments? Or questions? All right. So when we think about about mission or solidarity as accompaniment, as this sense of mutuality that embodies all of those principles. First and foremost, accompaniment means we are present, right, to whatever community that we are in. We are present to them in relationship. And presence alone is often enough. In a mentality in the US, we have a mentality of we have to do stuff. It's very hard to take groups of people and not think, okay, what is it that we're going to do? It has to be, we have to fix something, we have to build something, we have to do something. And it's true that that is going to be a part of it, but first and foremost, it's our presence that really matters. And then it would be an active presence, right? An active presence that would also help to uplift the dignity of the community and help them to realize their own goals. So that's what we mean by accompaniment. Does that make sense? Yes.
Question about presence.
Yes.
Go on a trip, you're present with folks face to face, and you leave because you have other duties here at Villanova or wherever else.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible to remain present once you leave?
That is such a good question. And I think that the answer to that question is yes. And on different levels, right? So the leaders who are the continuity, right? The staff at Villanova or the leadership here, there is a continuity where you can maintain an ongoing relationship in various ways. So in many ways that relationship has its continuity through you as leaders. But in addition to that, I think that the best immersion programs are the ones that find a way to keep people engaged after they come back. So what is that way, right, that we keep people engaged? And that is generally up to the community that you're working with to work together with them to figure out what is a good way to keep people engaged. So when I was working in Columbia, as an example, you know, everyone I ever worked with in Columbia had a very good understanding of how U.S. foreign policy affected them. You know, really, they knew more about U.S. foreign policy. People at the very base level in Columbia knew way more about U.S. foreign policy than anyone in the United States knows about how U.S. policy in Columbia affects Colombians. So they would say, "Can't you do something about your government?" That's what they would say. So in other words, and that's advocacy, legislative advocacy that CRS is deeply engaged in, by the way. That's a way that you can engage through CRS. So the point is there are ways to stay engaged in a relationship, right, beyond that trip. And what I would say is that it's important for the leaders, those of you who are leaders, to remain in relationship even when you're here. Right, I communicate with coffee growers in Haiti via text message in Haitian Creole. Right, they're at the top of a mountain somewhere in the middle of Haiti. That's how we communicate, we stay in touch. It can be done, and it matters to people. It matters a lot. It's the most important thing. Yes?
I'd just like to give a quick example of that, if I could.
Please.
2 weeks ago, I went to a wedding down in Washington, and it was of a young man who I met 14 years ago walking along the shores of Lake Victoria in Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
And meeting him at that time, when he was 13 years old, I never thought 14 years later I'd be attending his wedding in Washington. But just being able to start the relationship then, continue here and there throughout the years, and how it continues to unfold. So I just think it's really important, and how important that is for the folks we are encountering to continue that relationship as well. He's done a better job of it than I have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, because that's what he cares about.
yeah.
It matters to him. It doesn't matter so much that you come in and fix something.
Right.
It matters to him that you're walking with him in solidarity and that you care enough to maintain that relationship with someone who lives on a different continent. That's what he cares about. And that's been my experience as well.
I think it's the feeling of connected, of not being forgotten, of
Yes.
being isolated, of being connected to something larger than, because the situations we often find are so isolating, whether it's poverty or whether it's geography or remoteness or disconnected from influence, or to sort of have somebody who or to feel connected to the world, to the larger world, is a big thing. I often hear that don't forget us.
Right, because isolation is actually a major cause of poverty.
Right.
People not having access to markets or roads or education or communication, that kind of isolation, it makes people feel less isolated. Absolutely. And I would say that's true in this country as well.
Yep.
Other comments or questions? So I'm just going to sum up because I'm about out of time. So this is basically what I've already said. I didn't talk about this, but in reality, if we don't make some basic efforts, those of us who are in relationship, if we don't make some basic efforts to understand the language, the culture, and the traditions of the community that we're planting ourselves in, then we can't have a real relationship. And when I was in Columbia, people used to say to me, "Why do you send people here who don't know anything about us?" That's what they would say. They would say, "You know, we don't understand why you do that." So that is basically, you know, it's basic stuff. And in my own relationship with Haiti and Haitian communities, people used to say to me 15 years ago, because I've been involved a long time, they would say, "Why don't you learn Creole?" And I was like, Creole. And the reality was they knew that I wasn't committed. They knew I wasn't committed because I hadn't made an attempt to learn the language. It was only after I made an attempt to learn the language that people realized I was committed. It matters. Don't underestimate the power of prayer. It binds us together with each other and with God. And then regular and reciprocal visits. Do we ever bring people here? And it's often not easy. Sometimes there are visa problems. But do we ever bring people here? Because when we do that, they can be exposed to a much larger group of students than the few that go down there for immersion trips. And then when we decide what we're doing, first of all, do we have an invitation? So let's check out whether we have an invitation and what that invitation is. Right? And then decision making about what we do that's mutual and joint and that respects the dignity of all parties. So decision making that involves a dialogue. And then, yes.
Can I just comment?
Please.
There, for us academics, there actually is a model for this. It is called community-based participatory research.
Yes, it is.
So you know, that's a way for us to go.
Right? It's an entry point.
Right.
Yep. Thank you. So we assess our success not on, yes.
Sure. So, as a generic approach, or sort of a general concept, is it fair to have a in-country liaison for these type of things, for establishing that kind of communication?
It's often what people do. Like you have a point person on the ground that is a liaison between whatever the community is and the community here, but that person should be from the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is not always the case.
Right. It's not always the case. That's why I make the point. So we assess our success, right, not based on how many people we feed or how many patients we see or how many things we build, right? We assess our success based on whether or not the community that we have been inserted into has an enhanced capacity to do this, whatever it is, for themselves. Okay, it's a lot of words, but that's what it means. And then I mentioned the Columbia, yes.
I'm sorry. How then do you communicate that with funders?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's really not regular.
Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
I can answer part of it.
Yeah, it's a question
Okay.
it's a question that CRS grapples with as well, because this capacity strengthening is what we call it, and Paul's going to talk about it a little bit more. But and actually CRS has gotten some serious funding for it, but it is the direction that we have been going in our overseas programming as well. So how do we build up the capacity of local communities to do this for themselves, and how do we get funding for it? And you're right, it's easier to get people to send checks for a feeding program. The problem is it doesn't address the issue, right? It's not a long-term solution to poverty. And what we're talking about, this capacity strengthening, that is much more transformational. So anyway, I think you're going to address that a little bit more. And then I talked a little bit about advocacy, but we also, one way that we can stay engaged even after we come home is to think about what are the structural causes of what's going on there, and are there ways to address it here in the United States. And I'm going to stop because I'm eating into Paul's time. And there will hopefully be time at the end for additional conversation, lots of conversation this morning for us to unpack this. And thanks for the dialogue too, this has been really good. I'm going to pull yours up, Paul.
Thank you.
Need my glasses.
I'm actually going to have people introduce themselves and talk about the schedule for 2 minutes.
Sure, however you want to do
I
it.
think it would be good. Great. Thank you, Kim. Wow. So Kim has an approach where she is carefully selecting what she's going to talk about and then really engaging in a dialogue. I'm just going to throw a lot on the wall and see what slides down. But maybe another way of saying it is I have a PowerPoint presentation which was really prepared for a different kind of audience, and I'll be presenting a couple of different things, but definitely the themes that you've already brought up in response to Kim's great presentation is exactly what I'm going to be focusing on. And there'll be plenty of time. And actually, if that's okay with Sue and everyone else, I actually wanted to take, I think we're doing okay on time.
Yes,
so I was actually going to ask people to briefly introduce themselves. If that's okay, we can do more of that in the small groups. But first, just a reminder of the schedule. So I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes or so. Again, some of it will be rapid fire, and some of it will be, again, just asking for your input. And then we'll have at least 20 minutes to talk before we go into small groups. And those small group sessions, and they're around the corner, and so we can talk more about the logistics of that. You'll be split in two, and then the idea is to surface what in our presentations or in the dialogue actually grabbed you, that you actually provoked you, or you wanted to challenge. And then we'll be coming back here in this room, and then we'll be kind of talking about themes. We'll be reporting back out, and then we'll be kind of generating themes about host communities and Villanova participants, in which that we're going to again explore again in small groups before we come back. So in there'll also be a break. So your next break is, I think, actually listed at 11:10. But obviously, if you need to leave briefly, that's fine. And I guess so you can tell us where people know the building, so they know where to go in terms of the facilities. Okay, bathrooms, etc. And there's coffee in the back. But I just wanted to kind of just remind folks of what the schedule is, so you have plenty of time. But I'm just really glad that Kim broke the ice in terms of really getting you to offer your experience, because that's going to make it, I think, a really more memorable workshop. But so I was, of course, curious. What a great idea to bring nursing and engineers and theology together, max mix. But I just wanted to ask each person just to say their name and what part of Villanova they're representing or coming from. So can I start with you, Virginia?
Of course. Well, my name is Virginia Moncada, and I am coming from Nicaragua. I work with the team with Villanova here for the telehealth project Nuevas Lalas.
Bienvenida. Okay.
Gracias.
I'm Barbara Ott from nursing. We take students to Ghana and to Nicaragua and Peru, and most recently this summer I worked with Partners in Health in Haiti, opening a hospital there.
I'm Betty Mariani, and I'm from the College of Nursing as well.
And I'm Tammy Kerr, and I'm also from the College of Nursing, and I take students to the Dominican Republic to work with the Haitian migrant workers, and I've also started taking students to Nicaragua.
Oh, hi, I'm Mary. I'm a campus ministry intern. Part of my duties is to be an advisor for the service break experiences.
I'm John Albert, also a campus ministry intern with the same responsibilities as Mary.
And I am Jared Kinkley. I'm also a campus ministry intern.
I'm Tim O'Connell, and I currently direct the service break program.
I'm Matt Reese. I'm also an intern. Just to add, we are also full-time graduates.
Great.
Yes.
Jerry.
I'm Jerry Byer. I'm a new member of the Theology and Religious Studies Department.
My name is Matt. I'm a campus ministry guy.
My name is Nora Filler-Reynolds, and I'm actually not here with the Villanova hat, but as Vice President Water for Waslala.
Great. Okay.
I'm Susan Mackey-Callis, and I chair a university-wide committee on comprehensive and strategic internationalization. But I also am faculty in the communication department, and we're developing a program in Ghana. So we'd love to see about how an immersion experience can be part of that.
Great.
I'm Karen McKenna from nursing, and I've done several immersion experiences.
Daniel Kane, graduate student in sustainable engineering, primarily working in Panama and Nicaragua.
Jim O'Brien, mechanical engineering.
Jordan Amelia, I work with the College of Engineering, in charge of the Engineering Service Learning Program. And at the moment we have programs in the Philippines, Cambodia, Nicaragua, Panama, and we've done some with the Navy as well.
Frank Algado from Geography and Environment.
Will Stone, I'm the campus minister in the Center for Peace and Justice Education, and I advise the CRS and Master's student.
Great.
My name is Eric Muse, and I'm a first-year master's student in theology here at Villanova.
Hi everyone, I'm Maureen McCullough.
Welcome, Maureen.
Hey Maureen, I'm the Regional Director for the Northeast Mid-Atlantic region for Catholic Relief Services.
I'm PJ, you've already been interviewed.
And I'm Barbara Wall.
I'm Nancy Shartopko from nursing in the dark distant past. I worked for WHO in Bangladesh and I was a Presbyterian missionary in Japan.
My name's Ian. I'm a grad student in the Sustainable Engineering program, and I was an in-country liaison in Nicaragua for the last 2 years.
Tom Hogan, Director of Student Development, also teach in the History Department. I've advised several immersion experiences and also run service programs out of our office as well.
I'm Irene King. I'm the Director of the Center for Service and Social Justice through Campus Ministry, and Tim and I work together on the Break program.
I'm Tim Horner. I'm with the Center for Peace and Justice. I've done some break trips, both domestic and international, and also do the summer program in Rwanda.
I'm Joanna Vaughn. I used to coordinate the service break program with Tim, but I now work with the Augustinian Volunteers, which is a lay volunteer program run by the Augustinians.
My name is Hannah Cumberer. I also work with Joanna, the Augustinian Volunteers.
I'm Fran Keene. I'm Interim Director of the Center for Global and Public Health in the College of Nursing, and I most frequently take students to South Africa.
I'm Ruth McDermott-Levy from the College of Nursing. I'm involved with the interdisciplinary program with Bohemia in Nicaragua with nursing, engineering, and business. And I'm also involved, we're going to be going to Panama with another interdisciplinary course, and I've taken students to, as well as Nicaragua, Peru, South Africa, and Oman.
Wow, great. Thank you so much. I mean, yes, Marie.
Just one other thing I forgot to say, Kim was talking about relationship. I guess it was 4 years ago. Sue, Tim, Tom, Fran, and I were on a delegation with some others from Villanova to Rwanda, and that has, I think, cemented us in ways that we never could have imagined, and it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, not only for the group, but I think for the people that we develop relationships with there. I just wanted to put that in.
And my hope is that we'll have another one soon.
Plug. Great. Keep plugging. I wanted. Thank you, Marie. I wanted to do this because I think the geography of like, okay, so the nurses are up front, and the engineers are way back. So obviously, to make a max mix work, right? The mix mix, we obviously have to mix you up, and we will. But I was thinking about that in terms of participatory rural appraisal and other things. Where one of the things we do is we walk a transect through a village. And just document what you find in mapping. So you indulged me, but I think it's important as we go forward. So as I said, I'm from the New York area. I'll talk a mile a minute. I will slow down. But mainly, and I'll pass out some copies of my PowerPoint. What I'm going to be talking about mainly is this topic of, are there lessons from CRS's overseas experience and this tool that we use, you might even call it a heuristic device, the integral human development. And that is a question. It's not necessarily that there are. And I think that sense of humility and modesty, I think, is necessary when we talk about development for all the reasons that Kim said so well. But the first 20 or 25 slides, I'm just going to go through rapidly because some of them are just pictures, and some of them are things that we can come back to. And really I'm going to focus on what really I think may be happening in the world of development. In other words, I will summarize this integral human development, this way that CRS is thinking about its program, since we work with partners, which therefore we do a lot of different kinds of projects. It's not just health projects, it's not just agriculture projects, or justice and peace projects, it's all kinds of projects. I think there are questions that come up when we think about integral human development and solidarity and the topics that Kim was saying with what's happening in the world, and you already were there. In terms of the communication, for instance. So I went up to see I'm father of a 16-year-old as well as a 19-year-old. So the 16-year-old was in his room doing homework, at the computer, headphones on. So what is he really doing? Who's he chatting with? iChat. Is it friend? Is he getting homework? Is he with his rock band friends doing something online? Dad, I was just texting with the people in El Salvador I met over the summer. What? So yes, I made sure Ben went on a service trip this summer, and I could talk more about it, but it struck me that this idea that we can be connected, and this was a poor village in Cabañas in El Salvador, and he stayed with a guy who was a beekeeper who had lived in the United States, and again, all those stories. But things are changing in development, and information communication technology is one of those things, but also development practice and the challenges that the new world presents. And then again, how might this experience apply? And these are things where you're the experts, and that's what we'll be doing for most of the workshop, is drawing and eliciting from you. And I've already seen some things that Sue put together and things that you want to do better, as well as things that you think are doing well. At least for my son's experience, the preparation was really important, and it was done fairly well. But maybe the preparation also needs to change over time. So anyway, so that's what I'm going to do really quickly. So here I go, integral human development. Why did CRS come up with this? And Rwanda has an important place in CRS's self-reflection and re-examination that happened in the 90s, and I was privileged to be part of it, both overseas and at headquarters. And there were ways that we came up with something called the Justice Lens, which was a way for CRS to bring Catholic social teaching back into its work, but also to really make sure that whatever technical interventions we were doing with villages, with communities, with local partners, that we were seeing it through the lens of Catholic social teaching, of equity, of solidarity, of preferential options for the poor. And the Rwanda experience, the fact that a genocide could happen in a place where we had worked for so long, it's not that we didn't know what the issues were, but certainly our programming wasn't necessarily aimed or really taking into account all that was happening. And we have other frameworks, food security and other technical areas. It might be health system strengthening. It might be an AIDS project, which is working with a variety of community groups in terms of income generation, in terms of helping children, orphans and vulnerable children. So we needed something that kind of put all this together. And what was interesting about it also was that a lot of staff from around the world, and our strength is in our local partners and our local staff. We have thousands, 4,000 local staff overseas, and they're of all religions and all different nationalities, and it's one of the things, certainly one of the reasons that I'm around, been around at CRS for so long. What is it? It's a concept, it's a goal, it's a process, it's everything. One way of thinking about it is that if you're promoting the good of every person and the whole person, then it is not just about your income. It's not even just about your health. It's about all of these different elements. And we think of it as a process because it's, if you're participating in integral human development, then individuals and communities are expanding their choices. And they're also protecting, they're meeting their basic needs, but they're also addressing some of the things that keep them poor. And that is a key element, and that's something that CRS articulated and started saying in a more open way when we adopted the Justice Lens. And then we said, how do we operationalize it in so many different country contexts, with so many different partners, with so many interventions? Where do we get the stuff? I mean, again, it's a very simple tool in certain ways, but papal encyclicals, Catholic social teaching, our own guiding principles, and we're building on these other concepts which are well known in many other secular or other faith-based groups that relate to household and livelihood strategies. But the idea is that it is universal, and it's also important for sustainable development. So many projects do not succeed because they do not continue in time. In fact, some projects undermine the very resilience, the very leadership that, as Kim said, are so essential to making things continue. Even if it's the best pump, even if it's the best, and my goodness, we just solved this medical problem, but oh, the clinic's not going to stay open because there's no user fees or there's no one's paying the personnel. So all of those things are critical. And just to make sure you have a mouthful, as we'd like to do at CRS, let's talk about it in one sentence. Everything we want to do in the world. And let's be modest about it, right? The people we serve increasingly realize their full human potential and solidarity with others in the context of a just and peaceful society that respects the dignity of every person. Oh, and the integrity of creation. The world, the climate, this blue orb, and all of the above. And many of you know much more about the theology and the stewardship of creation. But again, so that's one way that we kind of summed it up. This is a not so great chart, but it is at least a way of thinking that we began to think about putting some of the pieces together. And there's a diagram that Kim just gave me, which I'll put up next. But the bottom line is this. When we go into community and on the invitation of the community, thank you, whoever said that, we should be not looking not just at the needs, but at the assets. What do people have? And how are those assets either made available or actually constrained by the structures and systems, institutions, religious, political values and beliefs? They actually make a difference in how people consider a loan program. In some places, if you're doing better than someone else, you're taking it away from somebody. That's important to know if you're asked to participate in the project by. And then for CRS, since we do relief, it's in our name, shocks as well as trends. And a resilient community is one that can recover better and that will not use all of its assets in responding to a crisis. So those are really important. And I'll move even more quickly. The idea that it's not just one thing, it's not just financial or political, economic, it's spiritual as well, and that is an incredibly important asset. And those who do not use it or underestimate it, if you're working in Madagascar on a nutrition program and you did not know that there was a local healer who may or may not be Christian at all, Protestant, Catholic, or Muslim for that matter, and then you're trying to teach and work on nutrition and you're not addressing that source of power and asset, then you're going to have a problem in achieving your goal. Here is what Kim offered, which I think is a great way of thinking about how we begin to use this tool when we are working with partners to develop a project. And again, the invitation has to come from the partner, and it has to be a project that we really is their project that we're helping with. But this first idea that we better understand it, and whether it's participatory rural appraisal or other techniques, but understanding the context, the political context. How many times have you heard about a community group in one particular place, but you don't know about the larger context sometimes, or you're not connecting it to other parts. So understanding the partner community over time, its relationship to other communities, even within the community, are critical. And building on those assets. Yes, people have needs, but building on the assets may be a better way to address them. Making sure the programs are transparent. Does everyone know what's going on? And that's not always easy to build into your relationship. And making sure you're getting feedback, as well as making sure that what you do is sustainable. As I say, you'll be getting a handout with all of these. Again, we use it for all these reasons. We want to make sure that even if it's you think it's really just about improving the cassava yield, that even a project that sounds so technical and so agronomic, or building a building, or earthquaking, an area that was recently hit by Gulu Gulu in Haiti, all of these things actually enter into it. And you can make things worse, particularly in a conflict situation, if you bring people together to do a project, or in fact are doing it in a way that actually doesn't bring them together. Often we try to use projects, sometimes shelter projects, water projects, in order to bring communities together that have, for whatever reason, been opposed to each other. So all of these things, and particularly these other issues that are much harder to get at, the systems and the structures and the inequities, we try to use this tool in order to look at it. And when we say assets, they can be tangible or intangible. More assets, the wealthier you are, greater diversity of assets reduces vulnerability to shocks. One quick story. I was in a village doing a participatory rural appraisal, and one of the things we do is wealth ranking. How do people in the community consider, what is their definition of being wealthy? And just to let you know that what is wealth can change according to who you're asking. So we interviewed one woman, and she said, well, wealth is having a lot of children. They can support me, they can work, wow, okay. So another woman, though, we said, well, what is wealth? Well, if you're poor, you have a lot of children. Because, my God, you got to feed them. And so right there in the same village, you had. So this idea of what is an asset, it's something that can also is not necessarily fixed, but we do consider assets that are not tangible as well. I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there are. We use it in all kinds of different ways to design the projects and programs, but we also look for those risks and those vulnerabilities. You can build something up and it can be destroyed by war, by a natural disaster, by even a political event. And that's what we've seen in many cases in a number of places where we're working. We didn't consider Mali to be a fragile country. It turned out to be, for all kinds of reasons. One of the reasons was its next door neighbor, Libya. So this idea that you ought to look into that. And part of what we're doing is not simply to make sure that that community has the clinic or is growing crops, but actually it can resist an epidemic or can resist a blight on their crop. They have a way to manage and cope without leaving, without really destroying or limiting all their assets. And it applies to all these different areas. Maybe a key point here is, and I think, Kim, you said it so perfectly, wait a minute, why would the Haitian coffee farmers want to spend time with these people? You know, this idea that these are complex portfolios that poor people have. Do not send them on a wild goose chase. We had a project in northern Senegal, fish culture. The farmers are spending a lot of time building the fish ponds. It turned out that the cost of the fish farm, the fish coming out of those fish farms, was more than if they had just bought a fish off of the truck, 40 or 50 miles away. We were putting those poor farmers at risk. So we got to recognize that, and we have to understand that system. They're conservative often for a very important reason. Very diverse. The systems where we're working are very different, and that's why we want to make sure we have a system that allows us to look at that, and we want to focus on the strengths. Since so much of the development discourse in the past has been about needs. I'm coming to bring you said this very well, Kim, I have this knowledge. We're from a university. We're from the government, we're here to help. Anyway, all of those things. And I think that, I forget who said that. Was that Thoreau? If I knew someone was coming to do me good, I'd go in the opposite direction as quickly as possible. So as we kind of use that jaundiced eye, using still the idea of solidarity, still the idea that invited in we can make a difference, we want to make sure that we're looking at these things in all these different ways. And we need to empower people. And so that part of what we're talking about here and what I'm going to get to and cut to the chase now is how do we empower them. By the way, if you've ever done any of these techniques, they're so much fun. And I was privileged to be part of a team evaluating a sesame project, and we had 3 Africans and a couple of Americans and a lot of local languages. And we did maps and we talked to people. And the point is, wasn't what we were doing as a team. We were engaging the people in the community to do it, so they could begin talking about things and decide what was important. And the women were involved, maybe in cultures where the women weren't always at the regular meetings or at the meetings that the official development projects or the government called. Really important, really fun, great way for students to engage. Amazing, in fact. And a way to connect to the community in ways that you can go back and build ownership. So all kinds of ways of doing it. And you can chart your progress. We do this now in a lot of places in CRS. We put a chart up, not saying CRS built this with the taxpayers' money. We put up a chart saying how is the community doing in fulfilling its commitments that it made to itself. Interesting. So strengths and opportunities. What is that we're doing? It's a relationship, but what is the thing that we're going to do to enhance that relationship, to make sure it responds to what the community actually wants and is sustainable over time, as well as all these other good things? And the part that we were getting to, and that I'll spend the rest of the time, a lot of the rest of the time talking about, skills and capacity for our staff and our partners. So, let me stop there. Just to kind of, but that was a lot of stuff. Integral human development, does any of this sound familiar? This term, either from Catholic social teaching or from other development techniques, make any sense at all? Yeah? Just so it's just stuff you've known before, pretty much? Yeah.
It is something certainly that nursing does, but watching that, I also think one of our shortcomings is that we collect all these data and we do all these assessments, but then we don't follow through. And so we assess people to death in the U.S. and overseas, and it's really unfair and unkind.
Thank you for saying that. When I was in Rwanda doing evaluation with a Rwandan psychologist and an Ethiopian American, we were almost like running over the PhD candidates doing evaluations or assessments and evaluations of 5 years after the genocide, and how much of that information is going back? How much is that useful to me? So it's an incredibly important point. Anyone else struck by either, okay, like how is this used, or the different sectors, or does this sound pretty standard in terms of yes?
It does, but it also kind of makes it more difficult to understand how the temps might fit in, which I kind of call it, we're temps, especially if we're talking about immersion experiences for students. I mean, these are long-term goals that you talk about with staff and with partners. When you talk about partners, you talk about in-country partners, right? So how, in that cycle, which is long-term, which is based on training and building, I think that's kind of what we're is like, where do we fit into that cycle?
Right, excellent question.
And what do we bring? That I feel farther away after seeing that than closer.
Yeah, you mind if I answer it?
No, please.
I'm
not going to. No. Not right now.
We've got a good thing of collaboration here, but I can't, I'm not going to give you the like, oh, this is the answer. But I can give you a window into it, right? So, and I think that the circle thing that Paul put up there, and you're going to get a handout anyway, so you don't have to write the thing down. So, first of all, understand your community, be in a relationship with your community. First and foremost, that's the number one thing. Start there, right? And then the second thing is, we don't go in there and see need, right? We go in there and see strength. We look for assets. We look for gifts. We look for strengths. We go in there, we look for assets, and then how is our intervention, whatever it is, whether it's campus ministry or nursing or anything else, how is our intervention strengthening and lifting up those assets, right? Because in this framework, there's an intervention that if you lift up the assets, then you're really addressing the root causes of whatever the problems are, right? Because they have assets. They also have hopes and dreams, and ideas for how they want their situation to be improved based on their strengths and assets. So if we're not seeing that, first and foremost, we're not intervening where they're at as a community and as people that we're in relationship with. So to me, like the most important, to focus on the assets is the key entry point for all of us into this framework. And then the rest of it is, we want to be transparent, so everyone has to know what it is we're doing and why we're there, right? We have to be flexible. Things change. We might have to change our project. It might not be working. So we change in collaboration with our community partners. And then the sustainability thing, which I talked about and which Paul has talked about well, are we really looking at how this is going to survive after we're gone? As Paul said, it could be the best pump in the world, but if we don't have a plan to maintain it, it's going to fall apart in 2 years and it was a waste of money. So that's my answer to your question. That's our entry point is focus on the assets, relationship, right? Focus on the assets of the community. How do we lift those up?
Mark.
I think one of the things that we've done with our work in the Dominican Republic is we have started working with other universities that go there, like UMass and Yale, and we've developed our own in conjunction with those in country in the Dominican Republic. And we have monthly meetings, and sometimes those individuals from the Dominican Republic, because of technology, can tap into these. So when I'm going down there in 2 weeks, I know what UMass did when they were there during the summer, and I know what's happening, when Yale has been there, or some of our partners in Canada. So on the outside, we're doing work here, but including those partners as well. And one of the things that has worked well is the water filtration program, where there was funding for that, and we helped them build the filters, but now they know how to build their filters. And now in country, they have water coordinators at the community level. So we've turned that project completely over to them. We got it going, we worked with other groups to keep it sustainable, and now it's completely in their hands, under their control. But the part of collaborating with other universities and other groups on the outside and including them has really helped some of our projects when we can't be in country as a university to be sustainable.
Thank you.
It's worked well.
Excellent point, yeah.
I think one of the things I hear with your question is how do the participants in the programs understand what their experience is in this broader, bigger picture? think that's a really hard thing to contextualize to them. But I mean, I think this does a nice job of like big picture, but the little, like the individual person going to Nicaragua for, 2 weeks, and that's the only experience they ever have of going there. I think it's an invitation to be open a little bit more, but it has to be contextualized, because all of this, I mean, this is overwhelming, I think, for me. I don't know about the rest of you guys trying to understand it all, but, and like I'm like naturally wanting to be engaged in this, but for the person that's just there for 2 weeks, I think that this is maybe a little overwhelming, but it's an invitation for them to start grappling with some of these issues. For that invitation, I guess, to be open to them so that they take it with them in their life somehow. And that's where I think like it's really important for these little trips. How do we keep these people engaged for a little bit longer than just their actual?
Yeah, Maureen.
I just think one of the key things could be for students to really recognize that the communities where they're going have their own assets and strengths.
Yeah.
I think so often students say, okay, I'm going to go down there and, kind of try to fix it or help with it. This is me bringing to this community. And I really think and I know Villanova does some great prep work before its students go, but generally, we have found in some of our conversations that can be a really big point.
Yep.
That students begin to understand, wow, this community has its own strengths and assets.
Exactly.
That can change, their vision and the way they look at the global.
One last question before I go on. Yeah.
I think that preparation part is key, and I think nursing has really tried to make that a focus of what we do with our international coursework, is preparing the individual student and opening them up to all these concepts. Do some of them engage in that? Yes. Do most of them? Yes, but some of them do not. And the other part of that is trying to keep them connected when they return.
Yeah.
Through faculty's personal relationship with them, and then through their own personal relationship with each other.
Right.
Some of them are going back on their own, maybe as part of us or individually. So I think opening them up and planting that seed, if you continue to communicate with them, I think it can work.
Apparently you have assets right here in Nicaragua, in other places. So I mean, I think that those ideas are perfect. Let me just do a couple more slides, and then we'll end, and then we'll get into a more of a discussion, both for Kim and my presentation. And I think the overwhelming part, I hear you. That was in a sense perhaps possible. This is particularly reminding folks. Robert Chambers was the guru of participatory rural appraisal, associated with the University of Sussex and development theorist. But just reminding us of what we mean when we're talking about this participation and how it applies to everything, not just a project. So when we think about education, what we're doing, what's being done here, and then what we talked about in terms of power and relations. You have the money, the unequal nature of of many development projects. Someone said it perfectly. And the idea of we're coming to help you with the project raises those issues, so we have to navigate them. And I think what Kim said and what you've added here is really perfect. Who says what is good and who identifies what change matters? That's why you need the transparency. That's why you need the feedback. And then who's the professional? Where's the assets and the knowledge? And again, what we talked about. And particularly, how do we do that with people who are excluded? And then that we're actually in a period of accelerated change. And that, I think for me, presents opportunities as well as challenges. And I wanted to talk a little bit about those really quickly. What's happening in the world? This is my snapshot, so possibly overwhelming, but the idea is to throw out some raw meat, see if anyone wants to cook it up. Rapid change. Fastest growing countries, 6 fastest growing countries are in Africa. Cell phone coverage, amazing. People finding out prices, people transferring money in Kenya, M-Pesa. People using crowdsourcing to find people buried under the rubble after the Haiti earthquake, based on a software written by a Kenyan going to college in the United States. What? Wow. That happened. Ushahidi. It actually happened. Climate, more frequent disasters, more intense storms. The people who contributed least to global warming will suffer the most. It's a justice issue. It's a technical issue. It's a social issue. And certainly a political issue. And the fragility, both of political and more and more development at the big picture is coming from private sources. It wasn't just for the oil and the gas and the diamonds that money is going into Africa. There's a market. People are coming into the middle class. I saw it in Brazil. It's rather amazing. And we're talking about partnering with organizations that we may or may not share all the values with. How do we do that? What's appropriate? Multinationals, local, for-profits. There are organizations that are shape-shifting, right? You're a university, but you're actually a consultant. Oh, you're actually a not-for-profit here, but you're a for-profit over there. So Department of Defense, USDA, those are government agencies. There's 22 US government agencies that fund development activities. It's a complicated situation out there, and that's important when we start partnering. Who are we partnering with? Donors want to fund local organizations. They say at CRS, well, CRS, what value are you really adding? I know your legacy is great, but really, what are you adding in particular? And I think one of the things we do add is that we have a constituency and we connect with places like Villanova. But that's a question that's being asked. And whose strategy? Is it a community strategy? Is that local ownership the local government, which may or may not represent civil society? In fact, in some countries, civil society is being restricted. Freedom of religion, freedom to assemble. There's a development authoritarianism model. China. Some of the biggest aid recipients in the world, like Ethiopia, are not democracies. Rwanda, a star in development, not a democracy, and also some serious questions about its activities next door. Impact and evidence, if you can't show it, forget it. You're not going to get the money. There's more art than that suggests in this. We can talk more about that. The post-2015 development, anyone heard of the Millennium Development Goals? Goals, yes. Okay, those were goals set by the international community at the UN in various different areas, water, health, hunger. We're going to come up with a new set, even though we didn't accomplish all of the first set. But they're talking about making goals that are going to be applied to us. We in the North, we developed North as well as the South. And the fact that communication technology and these issues of sustainability also are connecting our worlds in different ways, that how you vote, how you consume, how you invest, how you drive may be important to poor people overseas, but how people in China invest and vote in energy, that's going to affect us too. This creates a really interesting opportunity when we talk about advocacy as well. And these are, I'm just throwing out ideas. And here, let me just go into a 2-minute discussion of, well, if you do have a local partner organization, one of the ways to really work on sustainability is to work with that organization to improve its ability. And in the role of expats, you know, the people who are coming either on a short trip or a longer term, what are they adding and who's teaching whom? One book that I recommend is called Time to Listen. It is a book written by some folks from the CDA Learning Collective. Mary Anderson wrote something called Do No Harm, which is like the Hippocratic Oath of Development, particularly related to conflict. But with the help of CRS and many other organizations, she interviewed all of the participants in many development projects. And guess what? They liked aid, but it's not always achieving its aims, certainly not from their point of view. We need to change it. It can be done. I think immersion and service trips are actually one way to do it. So you'll have references to all this on the last slide.
Can I just add a book to that?
Yeah.
It's Paul Farmer's book about Haiti that he just wrote, and
Yes.
it addresses that, and it speaks as to what happened after the
Yep.
earthquake happened. I mean, how all these groups came in and how it actually became very detrimental.
Exactly.
And it's a fabulous, fabulous book, and I haven't read that one, but it's probably very similar.
In some ways it is. It's a much broader, it's a survey, and so it's based on thousands of interviews, but it gets at some similar messages, really important. One tool that we use at CRS is, it came out of our AIDS relief work, because we were said, the US government gave us lots of money, with our own money, we combined to support response to the AIDS pandemic, and we had to transfer those programs to local governments or local church organizations within 5 years. A complicated clinical program, something that CRS hadn't done a lot, of work on. And we realized that it wasn't just the clinicians that needed to be at a top level of our local partners. It had to be the governance. Who's on the board of the local hospital? Are they doing the books right? How about the human resources? How about all kinds of other issues? And that when a partner says, we want you to help us improve our organization, you can do various kinds of assessments if they invite you. And it's another great way, I think, for students to be involved in terms of learning what makes an organization, a not-for-profit organization, tick. These are the organizations that are going to keep those projects and make them sustainable. It's something called the HOKAI. I won't go into it in depth. It's a questionnaire that the partner goes through, and outsiders can help facilitate it. And it goes into all kinds of different things. So where the Integral Human Development Framework is a lens that focuses on structures and systems as well as the shocks, this tool focuses on the structures and systems of not-for-profit organizations which are working to support communities. And that's why it's a tool that we found very important, because CRS's role is much less doing the project, because after all, we have local partners and there's a local community. It's about helping those organizations, often church organizations, become sustainable. From the AIDS work, the Institutional Strengthening Guide has not only this tool called the Holistic Capacity Assessment, it also has chapters on governance, it has chapters on human resources, on finance, on operations, on all these different areas that are so important for an organization to thrive, to get different kinds of funding, to do advocacy with the local government. And so that's why this may be also something that could be helpful for some of your programs if you have a local partner, because you can keep coming back to it even with short immersion trips. And again, there's 9 areas, and the idea is that it's participatory, it's about open dialogue, and of course the local organization has to be the one that owns the data and the outcomes. So what did I just say? A lot, too much. We use this tool called Integral Human Development in order to try to bring this idea of Catholic social teaching and justice in the broader sense of right relationships into all of our technical work and our relationships with communities. When you assess whether it's the context of the community, the village, or a local organization, it's a way for you to build on those strengths in a really concrete way. Oh my God, you don't have job descriptions? You never evaluate the performance of your staff? Ooh, that may be a problem. Or, oh, you can't give that money to the AID, or you can't give that report to AID. They will audit you, and you won't get any more money. So very practical considerations. And our experience, I think, with these tools, the Institutional Strengthening Guide, which again we have a link to, and the trends suggest that some of these actually are going to be they could be applicable to what you're doing. So I end with some questions, and these are questions that I came up with, but you have better ones about these service trips and these immersion programs. Well, first of all, who evaluates the impact? Is there an evaluation? And by the way, CRS applies these to our own projects. In theory, we need to have evaluations of all our projects, but it's important to ask. Well, and who did the evaluation? Oh, three expat consultants from Washington did like what? No, if it's the project of the community, then the community better evaluate it. Well, how are you as a partner institution involved with that? What are the participatory elements? What tools you use to engage? We talked about some of them. Do you have goals? Is it simply you have a relationship, the students come down and that's it? Or does we want to make that water filtration system sustainable, and we want local partners to be able to know how to fix, how to source different parts or whatever it is. If you do, then that could be part of your project, which goes over time. The role of advocacy. I heard one definition of reverse mission is coming back to the States and doing advocacy to affect the policies that affect the poor overseas. Maybe there's double reverse. Maybe you're part of the double reverse, right? Yeah, you came here, you go back there, you go back there. So with the technology, with the fact that we are such a diverse society in the United States, my experience is in Africa. I'm constantly running into, in Washington in particular, people from the places that I've lived that I didn't think I would be using those 3 words of Senegalese Wolof, the Haitian Creole, of course, all the time. But there are opportunities, and advocacy is one of those ways, and it can be really the local advocacy that the partner is doing, as well as the advocacy back here. And then there are all kinds of development trends: the for-profit, the not-for-profit, the technology, the connections that we can talk about, the shared value. How have your relationships weathered change? Things change. Sometimes the project doesn't work out. And then this broader issue of social justice, how is that in the curriculum here? How does that relate to how you all are thinking as an institution? That's a mouthful, but I thought I would just throw out some questions, and then we're going to start a discussion to kind of surface some things, and then
We have about 15 minutes for questions and comments before we take a break. So what are you thinking? Questions or comments at this point?
Break?
Yes.
I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate.
Please.
Good.
Kind of provocative, because this is something I really struggle with. As people who do long-term sustained partnerships with communities, do you really think there's a place for 1-week trips?
I think it's a really, really good question. And let's try to together surface an answer to that question. I can give you my perspective. As someone who leads these things, I've led them for CRS, I've led them for, a bunch of different organizations as well. So I can give you my perspective, and then I'd be interested in the perspective of others in the room as well. My perspective is that they have enormous potential on a lot of different levels, enormous potential for transformation, both here and in the host communities. That potential is frequently not fulfilled. Because we lose the most important aspects of this, which are relational, which are the ones that Paul and I have been pulling out: relationship, subsidiarity, and sustainability, right? So when we lose that, when it's just, we're coming in, we're parachuting into your town for a week, we're going to fix something, whatever it is, and then we're going to go home, and that's the end of our experience, that, I think, is not fulfilling the potential of these trips. It ends up being a nice adventure for U.S. students, and I think that's all of our fears, really, is that's what it ends up being, is a nice adventure for U.S. students, but are we really doing transformational work? And all of us are in this because we want to do transformational work. I am, and you are. So are we being transformational, and how do we become transformational? And I think it's the principles or the issues that Paul and I have been pulling out that are going to help us to do transformational work. But if all you're doing is parachuting in and parachuting out for a week without that ongoing relationship and engagement, and all of the focusing on the capacity strengthening of the community and the sustainability and all those issues, then I would say you should ask yourself, is it really just about your students, or are you really doing transformational work? I believe that you can, and I've seen it. So that's my answer. Are there other answers?
I have another question to add to that, which is, how do you identify partners in other places that want that type of relationship? Because there are many who want us to parachute in and leave. That's their model. And so I'm wondering about identifying somebody who wants to engage more deeply as well with us, and not just go as all the other maybe spring break groups might be coming that they're used to and that they expect.
Right, so we need to start having real conversations. I don't know, are your partners local partners, or are your partners organizations that
varies
send
in country
trips?
to country, but
Because what I find is there are a lot of organizations in the U.S. whose job it is to organize immersion trips, and they sort of, and they're not necessarily going to be following the principles that we're surfacing here. And my position on this would be identify local community groups who are interested in having a real conversation with you about whether they want you in their town and why. And that's I think the key to this.
Right. Another way to think about it is, you're part of a university. One of the most neglected things, one of the area institutions that often does not get development aid has been higher education. So imagine partnering, and maybe you already have, partnering with local universities, which are also reaching out into communities. So the idea that if you have, my short answer, and I think your answers are going to be more interesting, is if you have an ongoing relationship which is based on these principles and good relationships, then you can plug and play. You can plug in your students because it's part of a long-term process which continues after, before, and after. And whatever the students are doing, they're not going to make it worse. They're going to really, do no harm. And they'll be surrounded by people who are really interested in getting the energy and maybe some of the work from them. And then they can come back and not only reflect on it, but then continue to support that organization in different ways. So that idea that presupposes, not only that you've selected the partner, but you have an ongoing relationship on how this is going to work. So maybe the first part of the relationship is not about, you know, the 7-day trip. Maybe in fact you find existing organizations that are willing to do it, or a university that is already reaching out to local communities, a local university that's reaching out to local communities, and you say we can bring some other. But that's just some off the top of my head. Yes, Barbara.
Sometimes it seems to me that there's pressure to get a lot of students involved in a lot of projects for numerous reasons. But I think one of my concerns and questions have been over the years that I've raised is within the context of serving different communities, do we really have a strategic plan with that particular community? For example, whether it's in Philadelphia or if it's in Haiti.
Right.
I like what Tammy had to say, connecting with the other partners, not only in country but out of country, to see what's been done with a plan to sustainability, so that it's not we jump in, we jump out, but what is our plan of sustainability in that, whether working, in addition of working with local partners, who are the other people that come to, that takes a lot of time. So instead of just all these kinds of programs, can we settle on some where we can deepen that kind of commitment versus sending hundreds out, because that's kind of nice, instead of deepening and being a caretaker, say, of a deeper commitment to sustainability, so that perhaps in 10 years, maybe we can move on to another site or project, because that community is now sustainable. And I'm even thinking in Philadelphia, where we go week after week after week, and project after project, what are we doing? What is our plan?
Right.
And how do we assist local communities to become sustainable, rather than serve us in getting our students there? That's my concern. So how do we reconfigure in the context of a strategic plan for sustainability? I think that's difficult.
And I'll answer, and then maybe Paul
Yeah,
wants to
sure.
too. What I would say to that is what I've seen frequently is that university programs are often, and I'm not saying this is what you do because I have no way of knowing, but many times university programs are focused on the student, right, as you're saying, right? And so how can we we do want to lift up the experience of our students, but how can we also lift up the experience of our partners? And you know, as people who work for a nonprofit organization, any functional organization has a strategic plan. So if the goal is sustainability, whatever it is, 10 years from now, we won't get there unless we have a plan, right? Where are we now? Assess where we are now. Let's look at where we want to be, and then let's make some steps for getting there. That's how you do it, but you do it not sitting in your office, you do it together with your local partner, right? How do we get from where we are now to where we want to be together in partnership, right? And I mean, I think you're saying really exactly what we're saying.
Yeah, I'm struck by analogy. We're constantly asked by our donors, you know, can't you take it to scale? I was like, we're working in, like, you know, this Cassava program funded by Gates. It's in 7 countries. It's 800,000 people. What, you know, can't you make it bigger? So there's, well, but, okay, no, that's an exaggeration. But still, they want, you know nationwide. And I think there's a tension. I think part of the planning process and part of this discussion is about acknowledging that there's a tension. And that it's not that having more students go is a bad thing necessarily, but sometimes smaller, you know, the deeper you go, the higher you fly. In other words, it's better. You get a better product, and you'll help the partner more if there are fewer students, because it's hard to create those opportunities for students to meaningfully contribute or even to visit for 7 days. So I think that acknowledging that's one tension. There's probably other tensions. When you get a grant, you have the whoever is giving the grant wants you to do certain things, and those things may or may not be exactly what you was motivating you in the first place. This is one of the problems about AID, the big U.S. government wanting to fund local organizations. Do they just want to pump money through those organizations to get whatever the U.S. government wants? Admittedly, maybe it's a good thing, like reduction in malaria, but or are they taking that local organization away from what their mission was? Because the resource-driven nature of development is really a bad thing, and it's not that resources aren't important. It's just that it's relevant. Yeah.
service trips abroad, fall trips abroad. But because I know that there are a number of faculty in the room, but I think increasingly faculty are starting to kind of figure out the possibilities of embedded immersion trips where you have a class. And the value of this is that really that helps both the student and the relationship with the local partner, because if you do it right, you know where you're going in the middle of the semester. And so you've already developed that relationship with your partner abroad, and you're communicating and planning and figuring out, you know, what you're going to do when you get there, and you're developing that relationship, and then you go. And it's wonderful for the students when they come back. It's not like there are students who are left hanging in terms of how I make sense of this experience, right? Then they have the whole rest of the semester to process and journal and reflect on the whole experience, and to kind of develop the relationship with their partner abroad. And because you've got a whole semester, there's a greater chance that you've already built in the roots of continuing that relationship. So
I actually
increasingly embedded immersion experiences.
Right.
That they're getting awareness about those possibilities.
I taught a class like that actually at Catholic Theological Union. When I started working at CRS, I had to stop. It got to be too much, but it was exactly like that. It was a theology class with an immersion trip embedded in the class. It was the best experience of any of the immersion trips I've ever led. I really recommend that, both because it gives you time, the relationship then becomes the relationships is sustained, and then also it gives you the time to do the correct preparation and the correct debriefing and engagement afterwards. There's one there and then one there.
Just kind of, I mean, as a teacher who works in Rwanda and does stuff on genocide, I mean, like, I'd love to do a class where it's an embedded course and we go to Rwanda halfway through or three-quarters through and we come back and debrief. But this is that, that's not cheap. You know, what we're talking about is there are very few people in this room who can make these decisions of these dreams. These are about allotment of resources, and I know you hate that, but these are about institutional it's relationships that have to be decided on the institutional level. That as much as we want to do this, I can barely run a summer program because it's so freaking expensive for students to go there for 6 weeks, and and that is a lot. There's a ton of resources, so if we're going to do this kind of stuff, we can dream up these great models, but unless our home institution is going to do it, and unless CRS is willing to put in the resources to make that available too, this is pipe dream stuff. And to be honest, unless there are people institutional level that are willing to put the money down to make this happen, to go deep instead of broad, this is going nowhere. I'm sorry to be so frank, but that's frankly what it is. Unless there's political will, it's going nowhere.
So this is
but I'm on my own.
Yeah,
doing my own thing.
We have one more, and then we need to take a break. Back in the back.
I'm not sure that it's totally a pipe dream. I mean, I think we're actually moving in that direction for some of the groups. An example would be Waswala, and I think what Tammy brings to the table, where we've been there for 10 years and we work with an NGO, and we are partnering. Virginia is here this year. Ian was there and employed by Water for Waswala for years and is now in our executive program. But I also don't want to lose the break trips. I think they have a very good function. And I think it's important for the students to go and give. If it's a habitat where they go for 1 week and they just help build a house, or my student last year went and saved the turtles in Costa Rica, all of that is important. And so sometimes we don't need strong relationships, but I think when we can develop the relationships, they really do provide wonderful, ongoing, sustainable things. But they do take time.
We have to break because we're on a very tight time schedule, and I know this is a great conversation, but we're going to continue the conversation in the break rooms. So we have 10 minutes for you to get coffee and snacks, and then there's 2 rooms, 206 and 207 around the corner. Half of you go in each. We're not counting off just half in one, half in the other.
I just want to say that both Paul and Kim have handouts. What Paul was putting up there is here, and we're going to distribute all of this to you, okay? So,
and the questions to be addressed in the 30 minutes that we're in small groups are going to be, what's the one thing that stands out for you from the presentations that you've heard? What challenges you, and what do you think you're doing really well? All right, so you can think about that in the 10 minutes that you're getting coffee. We'll see you in 10 minutes.
Around the corner.
Minutes for this conversation. So we're on a really tight schedule. And what we wanted to do is ask you to identify one thing from this morning's presentation that really stands out for you. And so we can just go around, and everyone, if you want to pass, you can pass. So maybe start here. One thing.
The sort of relationship between doing and sort of being, the relational aspect.
So the importance of relationship and the difference between being and doing, and the kind of being part as core of our faith. Irene, are you taking notes?
Not yet. I'm sorry, I'm still passing paper.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to take notes.
All right, here we go.
Thank you.
So I'm keeping mine brief. That would be the thing. You don't want me to elaborate.
No,
do you?
I don't.
No, I don't.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I'm interested in how we're going to get, I come from the campus ministry side of things, how we're going to get these conversations to filter down to our service program leaders, and then more importantly, even our service program participants. We're in our role with our advisors and the directors of our programs. How do we get these conversations down to kind of the ground level so they can operationalize that in their programs itself?
So how to take this conversation a step further and integrate it into your programming, essentially. Okay. Yeah.
I think my greatest concern when I'm in country is just the sustainability of the work that we're doing, and that the students are always very charged up when they're immersed in that experience, and ours is course attached for nursing. And so they're all charged up and they want to do this and they want to do that, and they come back and they get back in the real world, and then life happens.
So the sustainability both on the ground where you're working, but
And also
with
on the
nurses
student side, which I can
themselves.
see can come back to sustainability in the country if they can keep that momentum going.
So the issue of sustainability both in your partner communities and in the students.
I'm taking students to Panama over fall break for the first time, and I'm with nursing. Engineering's been there for quite a while, and so we're going to have engineering students and nursing students looking at the engineering piece of it, but nursing is going for the first time into a clinic that's there. And the presentation this morning made me start to jot down the idea, because it's a small clinic, that I could have one student in the waiting room with the patients and asking them a few simple questions about what they identify as the strengths of their community, their assets. And so it gave me a real concrete additional activity.
So what stood out for you really is the idea of asset-based development is that we're talking about.
And especially, I mean, it's our first time, we don't really know.
Irene, do you want to identify one thing?
Sure do. I also agree the asset base, because so often we go in with the need, the need-based focus, and also, still struggling with whether the short-term projects really are all about our privilege and our experience, and or whether they're really about doing something in the community.
Right, can they be redeemed, right, as a mutuality project rather than a project of students, that it just focuses on students?
Because they get transformed. The students definitely come back transformed. We haven't done any research in my department on whether the community gets transformed.
Right.
So that's what I'm concerned about.
Right, so make sure you write it down.
All right.
I'm a taskmaster.
You're a taskmaster,
I totally am, because we have such a tight agenda, and I think Sue in particular has goals for today to make sure that we meet those. So Nancy.
I had a lot of thoughts, but I'll just share one. One of the things I worried about was that it may not be that the locally identified need really gets addressed long-term. But in my experience, I was profoundly transformed, and that colored me as a person, as a nurse, and as a teacher for the rest of my life. So I don't think that's a failure. It just was a waste of money on their part.
So that's really the same issue that Irene is identifying, right? So how can we take our transformation and make it beyond just ourselves, right? Because we don't use poor people for our own spiritual growth, right? We want a sense of mutuality. So we do want our own spiritual growth, but we also want growth in the receiving communities, right? And how do we do that? And how do we help to facilitate that? Barbara.
I think I'm still with the assessment and the of strengths and weaknesses, but the thing nursing begins with assessing. We always have begun with assessing, but then frequently we get so tied up in the implementation of whatever we're trying to do that we don't get back to reassess and look again. And I think it takes more of an evaluation, repeated evaluations, to understand what people's strengths really are. And I would have to be mindful of that.
So continuing to using asset-based development to assess as well, so assessing strengths and not just assessing need. I mean, the whole idea of asset-based development can be a paradigm shift. In and of itself, that is a paradigm shift for people from our cultural context. Next.
One thing that popped into my mind in the last 5 minutes was we have these week-long immersions, and that's the place where we gain our appreciators and we gain our investors, the people who are invested in the change. Something gets ignited. How do we foster that ignition? But then also, how do we cater to the appreciators that will continue to support, whether monetarily or through prayer or whatever? How do we keep fostering their appreciation for the experience so that those that are invested in it can continue to do so?
I'm not sure what you mean. I'm a little bit.
Right.
It's all the
So,
sugar.
so there's a group of 15 students that go on an immersion trip for a
Right.
week, 1 week, 2 weeks, whatever.
Right.
One of those people is going to turn that into a career or a vocation,
I see what you're saying.
whereas
Got
the
it.
other 14 are going to be the ones shelling out the money or the prayers or whatever to support that.
Okay, I got it.
I think the thing that resonated with me in there was, and something I've seen in the past, is not understanding anything about the people in the place that you're going. So the prep work, and rather than just showing up and doing something, understand why, fitting into the local context, I guess.
Right, understanding where you're going.
Right.
Yes.
To me, it was a sort of paradigm shift in terms of the asset-based, looking at it and really looking at building up the strength in the community. And I've always, thought that and always heard that, but I just think that provided a good framework for that. And also, I just want to look too. My office also does a lot of service programs domestically. So how can we apply some of these principles, that we're talking about in a global sense, and look at it locally as well?
Yeah, they absolutely carry over. I mean, absolutely.
Nursing you've heard from, and I think we do a good job with prep for the students. I do wonder about in country. We've been in Peru now for 15 years, and I think that you can see how the engagement on their part in sustainability and their interest in us returning, and the importance that they have placed on it, and they tell the students every year, is really good. And I think we're able to structure more what we can do to move them to where they want to be. And I think it's beginning to take place in that one community. And I think they've had more success in Nicaragua because just geographically where they are, and a whole bunch of other reasons. But it is tough. It's a very tough thing to do.
So you're talking about kind of the sustainability issue.
Kind of sustainability part of it, and from their perspective, not
not
never
from,
my perspective.
from their and identifying for them what their hopes and dreams and goals are.
Yeah.
Yes.
I missed a lot because I had an earlier meeting, but one thing that I heard towards the end was how things rapidly are changing. And I remember when we first used to go down to Peru, just showing up. No idea what we were going to do, nothing.
No, hoping pick us up.
Yeah. Because there was no ability to.
With me the very first time.
Yeah.
Remember that the first meeting we said, "What do you want?" They said, "International airport."
Yeah.
It might be a little bit out of our scope, but we'll work with this. We'll work with this.
But the thing that's so different today, and that was true then when we started to go to Nicaragua in 2004, and we would just show up and we would come prepared and they would accept what we had. Now, with the ability to communicate and with our partnerships being so strong, we communicate all the time. Well, we go down 3 times a year at a minimum, and we have partnerships in all kinds of areas. It's still not easy, to communicate with everybody and say, this is what we're going to be doing. And the other school of nursing that we're partnering with, this is what they'll be doing, and then it gets okay. But the ability to communicate, the changes are are really amazing, and that's in 10 years.
So you're basically the ability to communicate, which really enhances our ability to make these partnerships
Right.
and to maintain the relationships that we've said are so important.
Right.
Yep. You didn't go.
So what were we supposed to do?
Name one thing that stood out for you from the presentations.
Just, I guess, affirming the things that I've been, hearing and trying to spread around to other faculty, which is the importance of an immersion experience, providing that relationship piece, right? And I think our students are aware it's not just, I'm gonna go and fix a problem and do charity in the world. They get that, but they don't quite know how it can be different. And I think really that focus on being present to the other and realizing that relationship is key to any, experience. That, I think, is a way for them to think about it differently that makes that mutuality more possible to achieve. And I guess the other thing is just that the whole challenge of maintaining that relationship that I mentioned before. And I do think an embedded immersion experience can sometimes be better at doing that, but it's always a challenge, even in a semester. I mean, how do you turn a semester into 4 years into a life of a lifetime of relationships? I think our students all the time, with all their connections to Facebook, I think it's exhausting to have to be connected to 350 friends on a daily basis. How do they do that, So I don't do it because
care as much
they don't
about each one.
So I don't want to do it because I don't want to be in a relationship unless I can sustain it. So I'm often hesitant to.
Right, it is actually the hardest thing to get people to do for that reason, and we are vulnerable. When we're really in relationship, we are vulnerable, and what I find in the U.S. cultural context, it's very difficult for us to be vulnerable to people that are, living in extreme poverty. It then equalizes things. When we are in relationship, we are vulnerable, and we're used to being the giver. Right? It is a shift for us to allow ourselves to be vulnerable in that way. If the relationship is real, we are vulnerable. That's how it works. So I've heard what I've heard is kind of 3 overarching themes: relationship and all of the. That was nice. Very nice. Likes me.
That's right. Only for Maureen would I do that.
I would not do that for Maureen. I would do a lot for Maureen. I'm not crawling
We've been
under the
places,
tape.
so.
So I've heard kind of 3 overarching themes. One is the theme of relationship being, instead of doing, and all of the issues around relationship, how do we do it, and mutuality and ongoing engagement and all of those issues, communication. And I've heard asset-based development and thinking about how we really concretize that in our projects and how it's kind of a paradigm shift for us. And then I've heard the sustainability issues. How do we really think through with our partners long-lasting change? So that's what I've heard. And then the kind of next thing we were going to ask, and I don't want to, we've been going around in a circle. Maureen, do you want to?
No.
Okay, sorry. So we've been going around in a circle. What I want to do now is the next part was to identify what are the challenges for your own programs. You may have already identified that in what you've already said. So whoever wants to just name any challenges that you feel that you can identify based on this morning's presentation.
Senior spring break.
That's our problem right now. That's our problem right now.
That's our biggest problem right now, is they're gonna go to Tahiti instead of going on.
Yeah. Cost
Cost.
of overseas immersion experiences.
I think it's time and labor intensive on the faculty's part. Especially to maintain these ongoing relationships year round. It's
Right.
not just a semester experience.
Right, to do the kind of deep intervention that we're talking about is much more intensive in terms of cost and time than what either faculty or students may be prepared for. Is that a summary?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Anything else?
Assessing student outcomes in a meaningful way.
Yeah. And actually, we're moving on in Nicaragua to assessing the outcomes, because we do an awful lot of teaching of the community health workers, and the government is depending on them they're the first primary contact out in the rural area, and we're supplying them with some equipment blood pressure cuffs and baby scales and things like that. But we're challenged to make sure that they actually are competent. And so we're actually working on a grant to see if we can do some sort of assessment and competency validation, which the community is asking for.
Sure, so you're actually talking about assessing outcomes both with students and in your receiving communities. How do we meaningfully assess whether our work is having the transformational effect that we want it to have? Other challenges?
For non-credit based programs like mine, how do we get enough buy-in so that we can do the adequate preparation? You know, when you have a course, oh my gosh, what a wonderful opportunity. But when you don't have that, it's very hard to get them to come to every meeting. So they do know about the people in country, they do know about the culture, so preparation.
So how, basically preparation and probably debriefing as well,
And
right? How do you
debriefing,
get
both
people
ends
to
of it,
come?
yeah.
Because when I have done this, you know, at a non-credit, it's hard to get people to come back after they've returned. Then you know, I always would give them food. Yeah, yeah, it's hard to get them to come back.
Got to get them hungry first.
Right.
Yeah.
Other challenges?
How often, excuse me a minute, how often do you try to get them together before you leave?
The leaders have an 11-week training, so that's a little bit.
That's different.
But the participants, maybe 4 weeks, and it's led by the student leaders.
I see, so it can
I'm new
vary.
to this position relatively, and so I'm reworking it right now, so I'm really welcoming your insights.
I wonder about some, you know, online, doing more that way.
Interesting, okay.
Could I ask, is it a challenge when students return, even if they have an adequate debrief of the experience, how to continue to keep them engaged? We always try to invite, CRS tries to invite them to advocacy and looking at systemic changes and whatnot, but do you all think you have in place ways to continue that engagement or to help them make the linkages between the experience and how they can continue to have impact or influence?
Well, as a former undergrad here that like went on many of these experiences that Irene is kind of talking about, it is really difficult to keep the students engaged after they get back. We do have a program where they're supposed to meet for reflections following the experience, but it is one of those things that becomes like the last priority. So after class, after homework, after going to the gym, you know what? Because what is it there for me? Like I already had my experience. I already went to the place. Like what more could I learn from this experience? So trying to get them to come after the fact is incredibly difficult because there's not that kind of need for them to go because they feel they've already had the experience already. There's not a continuing part of that.
Is one possibility, and I'm going to quickly turn it over to you to speak, Tom, but I mean, the Student Life has developed a fabulous program called Slice, and it's a way for students to, if you will, package and reflect on their co-curricular experiences, right? And I know that one of those initiatives is related to internationalization or culture.
Global awareness.
Global awareness, so.
And cultural competence, there's two different competencies.
Okay, and we know our students, let's face it, are all about, you know, how I can package and, you know, get a badge or a credit for this. And so I'm thinking that maybe your office could be real instrumental in some of these service trips where they're not embedded in the course and helping students kind of reflect and, you know, continue that kind of conversation.
Having that global experience is one of the criteria for that, but then also we didn't separate out the post-reflection piece, so we could put attendance at these post-reflection, post-break experience reflections to be part of that as well, so that's a great idea.
That's
neat.
I can add something to that too, and then we'll move on to what do you feel, what are we doing well, you know, based on, because we need to name that as well. But students are more likely to stay, in my experience, whether they're students or adults, actually older adults or younger adults are more likely to stay engaged if they've had a real relational experience, if they feel connected in some kind of real way to the community that they were in or to people. So it's one of the gifts of having you know, immersion trips that are relational in their focus. Relationships are what bind us. It's what people really care about, you know, and that's what will keep people engaged. It's what has kept me engaged. I mean, I've been in Haiti since 1997. You know, I'm there because of my relationships, you know, and that is what keeps us there. So it's the relational trips that keep us engaged. And then it's also part of the orientation or preparation when we lift up the importance of the experience as being not just about our personal transformation, but also about the transformation of that community. you know, and the advocacy that goes with that post, if we lift that up from the very beginning and then offer those opportunities for continued engagement, we have a better chance, in my experience. But it has to be held up as important from the very beginning. Any more challenges before we move on to the what are we doing really well? Because we should name those.
I mean, this is just like, you could talk all day about it, but I don't know that we as group of Villanova, specifically the campus ministry experiences, I can't speak for in engineering and nursing. I don't know how transformative we can be for those communities. Mm-hmm. I have no doubt that we can, those communities can transform us. I've seen it in myself, I've seen it in my peers, but I wonder how much we can really go down there and make a lasting relational impact. I know that some of the relationships I've had have continued since I've been back, but I think for a lot of those communities, it's hard for them to kind of look at a group of, 15 mostly white Americans coming in there and, working on a project with them and to feel really transformed rather than just helped. So trying to move from helping to transforming.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we need to name that as a challenge and put that on our list, because we're going to discuss kind of solutions or action steps in the next session. So that is a really important, how can we really be transformational in the communities that are receiving us? Huge issue. Yes.
But related to that, I think, one of the challenges, how do we evaluate how the organizations that we go and serve with in these communities, how do they impact the community? Because I think, I worry a little bit when I hear some sentiments, about, should we do these break trips because, we're not, having this relationship. Well, I think in some sense we could let ourselves off the hook because, for instance, there's like Rostro in Ecuador, right? We send groups down there maybe once a year or twice a year. But how do we evaluate how Rostro, we are one part of that and for 1 week, and our students come back transformed, but how does Rostro transform the Ecuador?
And how do you hold them accountable? And I think that should be, how do we hold accountable our partner organizations that we're working through that are not organizations that are necessarily indigenous? That's an organization based in Boston.
Right. So, I mean, Villanova is one piece of that and a very important piece, and we provide the resources. So as long as Rostro is making an impact and doing, having those right relationships, I think we can feel good about our participation there and kind of.
So the question is holding them accountable, and I think that's a great point because there's countless organizations just like that universities and high schools are working through to do their immersion trips. So how do we hold them accountable?
And those are mostly what we work through.
Right. Of course.
And
everyone
because
does.
we put out 800 students a year on these trips, and you couldn't do it if we had an individual relationship with each community.
Right.
I don't know how I feel about that. I've inherited this, so yeah, I think that's something we have to really.
I'm telling you, you can feel good about that. If Rostro's doing what they say they're doing, and if they are having that impact.
That's a message that I got. That and I think that might answer your question a little bit. That the students might not see that the transformation, but if the organization that we're working with is making an impact, then slowly but surely that something's happening. So if it's a good organization that we're going with, I think that might be because a week we cannot.
Yeah, and then it comes to how do we assess that in the organizations that we're working through, using the kinds of principles that we're talking about, using subsidiarity, using sustainability, using asset-based development. Are they really addressing lifting up the capacity of that community to take responsibility? Are they doing that, and then how do we assess it?
Do we have control of that? Or, I mean, like, that could be an ideological thing. Like, if we're trying to change the model of how we do immersion experiences to focus more on relationship and less on trying to do things or put things on the ground, then what if the agencies we work with, they say, no, this is what we want. You need to have a house built by the end of this week.
Right.
Because this is what we do, and this is what we tell them we do. Then we have to decide, do we want to participate in it, and how many places are out there that actually do relational based immersion experiences, and that might be a problem.
But I don't think we're talking about relationship, with every single thing. The relationship might be between Villanova and this organization, and the kids go and they build a home. In general, they work with community members.
Yeah,
so
that indigenous piece is
right.
I think
so
a big
in
part
general,
of it,
they
indigenous
meet
piece,
and have lunch with and lay bricks with local people. They may never see them again, but building the house, a doing thing, is a fine thing, and it may make a difference for that community, and broken bread.
But I think that's the challenge of what you're talking about is that the idea of like, maybe the house is a distraction. Maybe a house is really not what's the most important thing to them.
That's
Maybe
what I
the
would say.
relationship is the most important
mean
thing
to the
them.
community
To the
members.
community.
To the community.
And I think that's what you were
Yeah.
talking about this morning, which is a challenge
Yes.
because, you know,
If-
most of us come from doing. I'm an educator, so my doing is actually more relational because I want.
Right. If
I'm
you-
not out to put things on the ground or put things in people or like nurses, but
We
but
have
it's-
relationships too.
but you do have, but granted, it is a bit of a challenge to you make assessments of what the need is, and then you do that, and you solve the problem. It's a very problem solution model.
We would probably disagree with you.
No,
We would
I
probably
think you guys do
disagree with
a
you.
great job with that. But you got to admit there would be some tension between that model of putting a house on
I
the
think
ground
there is
and the relational part.
Actually, I think breaking bread, working side by side with a community member.
So can I need to
Yeah.
respond though, I need
Yeah.
to
I know,
res-
and I've done it. It's amazing.
I need to
Yeah.
respond on behalf of the communities whose voices aren't at this table.
Right,
Because
yeah.
if you ask them, they're gonna say to you, we don't need you to build our house for us.
Mhm.
That is what they say. And they say, you are spending so much money to send people down here to build a house for us. Send us the money, we can build it ourselves. You know, and that I think needs to be part of this conversation. And the same is true for medical interventions as well. Like how well is that community after your intervention able to provide nursing care for its own people without being dependent on you coming in? Because if you ask them, they're gonna say we wanna do it ourselves. Right, and the same thing with building the house. If you ask them, what do they really care about? They care about the relationship, and they care that you care about them.
Yeah.
That's what they
Right.
care about. So building the house may be something that facilitates relationship, but if it's the purpose of the
I know.
trip, then you're in violation of the whole of the reason why they might be inviting you in the first place.
Can I give you just a quick vignette about this
Yeah.
summer? And it will be quick. When I was in Rwanda, they do a community service day every month in Umuganda. It's the first Saturday of the month. And so we went and we wanted to participate. It's a national thing. So we go out and we have this place we're going to pick up this area. So we say, this is what we're doing. And then we all went into clean mode. Clean, and we just got too busy, and we were down on the ground, we were just pulling weeds, and we were just picking up stuff, and because this is what we do, we're cleaning up, it's Umuganda. We're so excited to be there. And I had one guy just stop me and said, whoa. Frankly, he said, basically, Umuganda is not about work, it's about relationships. This is the time when we as a community get together and the work is not important. Slow down.
Yeah.
Stop working. Who are you? Where are you from?
Right.
And
That's
so
what
I was
they
like,
care about.
and I was like, wow, he's absolutely right. That's profound. I was like, everybody slow down, and then we just talked, and then we spent 45 minutes picking up trash, but and then we spent another hour and a half just talking and walking down the road, and we didn't pick up crap. But that's not what Umuganda is. Umuganda is about community, and it was a glaring, simple example of what we were there to do, was to pick up trash and clean this space up, and they were there about building relationships. They wanted to know who we were.
Right. They do not need you to pick up
They
their
don't
trash.
need us to pick up
They
that trash.
can-
The trash is going to be back there in a week.
They can pick up their own trash if they want to pick it up, and that is not why they want you there. Absolutely. We need to break and go back into the other room.
There she
So,
is.
Thank you.
Man.
Irene, are you ready you're going to report for us?
Okay.